لله رب المشتكى رب الأواخر والأوائل وغدا يكون لأمتي صرح تزينه المشاعل وغدا إذا الحق اعتلى حقا سيزهق كل باطل.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. I could hear the lament in that music, and I could hear just the cries of the people. So many who have died and been displaced, millions really who've had to leave their country. And thank you for bringing the music, because music and art often is something that, in the midst of great tragedy and darkness, comes and can help us to heal and to understand. You know, the winter solstice, as you well know, is the darkest day of the year. From December 21st onward, daylight begins to grow a little bit longer and longer each day. So a solstice message is often about the beauty of darkness. Like the womb, the dark can be a place out of which new life is nurtured and born, or under the earth where we plant seeds, providing the conditions for new life to grow from out of that darkness. So my plan for this message all week was to go to the darkest place in the world right now and discover what light can be born from it and in it. That place right now is Aleppo in Syria. For centuries, Aleppo was a city where Muslims and Christians and Jews lived together well into the 20th century. It was considered an oasis of broad-mindedness, one of the urban gems of the Middle East, where different ethnicities and religions famously coexisted. Here are some of the people of Syria: families, young children. Over the past 5 years, a staggering 11 million people have had to flee their homes in Syria, and there seems to be no end to the suffering. For months, bodies have been piling up in eastern Aleppo as the buildings have come down. You can see some of these buildings. There's before and after pictures. The before you see at the top, and the after picture that you could see below. Pulverized by Syrian and Russian jets, burying residents who could not flee the avalanche of bricks and mortars. Today, tens of thousands of civilians are cold and hungry, are scarred by the deaths of loved ones, and are awaiting buses to take them from their homes to uncertain futures. Aleppo is now being added to the list of places where humans have failed to stop tragedies committed by other humans, such as Grozny and Rwanda, and places in former Yugoslavia. The leader of Syria, Mr. Assad, has literally crushed or starved over 400,000 of his own people. He's destroyed his own cities and attacked men, women, and children with cluster bombs and chemical weapons and barrel bombs. Destroyed beautiful ancient cities. While the world has watched on Facebook and Twitter pictures like these of the destruction and the devastation, but not acted, not having the will to act, not knowing what to do, we just watch as bread lines are bombed with barrel bombs and residential neighborhoods and even hospitals. Now, as I looked for signs of goodness, of signs of God in this horrific situation, I didn't find what I was hoping for my message this morning, but I did find something worth sharing. Let me set the stage a little bit by telling you how I got into the mindset that I was in. About a week ago, I was explaining to my teenage son an experience that I had had in Japan many, many years ago, over 20 years ago, when I was living there, and I was taking part in a traditional Japanese tea ceremony. It was with the Grand Tea Master of the Urasenke school named Shoshitsu-sen the 14th. And at these ceremonies, there's a scroll painting that hangs in an alcove as part of the ceremony. So I'm looking at this scroll painting. It wasn't this particular scroll painting, but the person translating it for me explained that it said, "Today is a good day." Oh, that's an interesting enough comment, except for the fact that he said the scroll is over 300 years old and had not been unrolled or used in a ceremony for more than a century. It will be hung for a few hours today, he explained, and then probably rolled up and not seen again for many, many generations. And so I asked, how on this day of all days do they know that it's going to be a good day? And my host helped me understand the larger spiritual point in this message and in this scroll, the meaning of which is that every day is a good day. In other words, every day has good in it, and it's our job to find the good that resides in each day, or even better, to become a part of creating the good in each day. So then this week I was talking to my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, and we were looking at a creche about the Christmas story, and I was asking her who the different characters were, and I was really impressed that she knew all the different people in the creche. But then I asked her if she knew where Jesus was born, and she said yes, on a farm. And I said, not exactly, honey. I understand how you would have that impression. It was actually a manger, which in those days and in that part of the world was a cave where the animals slept. And since there were no rooms in the inn, Mary and Joseph had no place else to stay, and one innkeeper, we're told, noticing that Mary was great with child, as the King James Version says it, invited them to sleep in the manger. And then I asked her if she could imagine how it looked and smelled in that cave. It surely had a dirt floor and hay on the ground. With all those animals, there was surely a lot of animal pee and poop and other smells, I suggested, and she loved that description. Kind of brought it alive for her. And I said, according to the story, Jesus was born right there, amidst the stink and the stench and the mud and the muck of a manger. Now, not wanting her to miss the point, I spelled it out for her that Jesus, who his followers believe is God himself, was born in a cold, stinky, dirty, humble manger. Well, about 20 years ago, after I left Japan, I set out on a bicycle trip, and I eventually made my way to Syria, and I was on my way to Bethlehem for Christmas. This was 1994. I wanted to see the place where there's now a church, but where supposedly the manger existed, where Jesus was born. There's a picture of me on the way to Syria. Now, I was on my way to Bethlehem, but I could not tell that to my Syrian hosts. When I got to the border between Turkey and Syria, I had to lie, because if I said that I was going to Israel, which they call occupied Palestine, I would not be allowed into the country. And I had to swear that I had never been there. I had no plans to go there. They'd look in my passport to make sure I didn't have a stamp from Israel. And if you have been to Israel, or say you're going, they keep you from crossing the border into their country. Now, they asked for my religion as well, and I was not going to take any more risks. I was on a bicycle. It would have been a really difficult thing if I didn't get in, so I told them I was Christian. Now, I didn't tell them I was half Jewish. I'm pretty certain they wouldn't let me in if I did. At least that's how it seemed. Now, once inside of Syria, I was told by the border guards, now when you go in, stay on the road for the first 20 miles as you're traveling, because there are landmines all over on both sides of the roads along the border with Turkey, where I was. So, some people wander off to, if I wandered off to have lunch on the side of the road, it could have been blown up. So let me just say that between the interrogation at the border, the lying, and being told not to get off the road at risk of being blown up, I was feeling, my adrenaline was a little activated at this point on the trip as I pedaled into Syria. And it was my first time in the Middle East. And eventually I started seeing men on the side of the road in small homes, and some of them started to wave me over, come on over. And these men had turbans and beards, and they looked like the only person I'd ever seen that looked like that was Yasser Arafat in the newspaper. And I thought of, it was always news about terrorists. And so, I was a little nervous thinking about, going over and meeting these men. I was just anxious in general at the moment. And so I just kept saying, gotta go. I was waving, but just kind of kept going for a long time until eventually I started to get tired, and I eventually took one of the men who was inviting me over up on his offer to stop. And when I got into his little home there, small little hut really, I was a bit anxious and I was a bit scared still. I didn't know where I was. I didn't speak the language, but he started a kettle of water boiling for tea. And he said to me in broken English, where are you from? And so I told him. I said, Chicago. He said, Chicago. And then he made his hands like this. He goes, it's dangerous in Chicago. And I realized how ironic it was that, both of us had images of the place where each other was from that was so dangerous, and yet there we were sitting having tea. And he said he'd seen movies about Al Capone, and he was just, thought Chicago was so dangerous. So it turned out that Syria was one of the absolute nicest places. The people were unbelievably hospitable and nice. I felt as safe in Syria as almost any other country I'd been in. Maybe Japan was the only other place where I felt so safe on my entire trip. The people were wonderful. They'd fight over, who was going to take me in at night to stay with them. They'd argue over it. Hey, no, we want to take them in. And they'd pack me lunches as I'd go, and it was just incredible. There was plenty of room in every inn along the way, but they wouldn't have it for me to stay in any of the inns because they were taking me into their homes. And it was quite incredible. In fact, I have a picture of a family near Aleppo, just outside of Aleppo. That's me in the white outfit there in the middle. They dressed me up in a traditional formal costume, and we took a picture. I loved my time in Syria, the people there. Honestly, I don't think, I never told anybody that I had Jewish heritage, but I don't think it would have changed anything between me and the people that I was with. But I made it across Syria. I made it into Jordan. There's me crossing into the border of Jordan, and eventually into Israel in time for Christmas. In fact, I made it to Bethlehem for Christmas Eve. I'd been telling people all year as I traveled through Poland and Bulgaria and Hungary and Czechoslovakia and all these places that I was on my way to Bethlehem for Christmas Eve. It was such a romantic notion, and it just seemed so, just like such a great thing. What a way to spend Christmas in 1994. The truth was, though, it was a pretty dismal experience. It was not the wonderful spiritual pilgrimage that I hoped it would be. I had to go through Israeli military checkpoints in order to get in. The Israelis forced us to get on official tourist buses. You couldn't just travel there on your own. Certainly couldn't bike there, or you had to get on these buses and go. And when I got to the church that was built over where the manger is supposedly was, there were so many crowds and so many people, and it was cold and it was windy, and I'd hooked up with some other tourists who were about my age, who were on one of the bus that I was on, and they were mostly from New Zealand. Great, young men and women, also in their 20s, and well, there were a lot of youth there from the like Palestinian youth, as it turned out, and young adults as well. And all night long, there would be some among them who would be inappropriately grabbing the women that we were with. So I almost got in a fight, actually, on Christmas Eve there in Bethlehem, very close. It was irritating, it was frustrating, it was humiliating, and truly there was nothing really spiritual or fun about it at all. And now what I would love to do right now is tell you that I finally found some corner and engaged one of these young men, and we got to know each other, and I learned about him and he learned about me, but that didn't happen. It was just a miserable experience. Now, I'd hoped, for this message that I wanted to find those rays of hope in the darkness. I wanted to find how God is born in these moments, and yet I realized they're not. That doesn't always happen quite that way. It was a miserable night. Nothing particularly redeeming about it. And when I look at the incredible devastation and the ruin in Aleppo and in Syria today, I don't see anything really bright enough to redeem the darkness and the devastation. Now, there are some stories, some incredible stories of immense bravery and courage and heroism. And I suppose that these are little points of light in the midst of unbelievable tragedy. But truly, it's a time that even with little bits of light is dominated by the darkness. A time like this season, in fact, when it seems as if it's just getting progressively darker and darker each day. And it seems as the ancients thought, that the light might actually be dying out. Now, these truly courageous and compassionate acts that are occurring in the midst of all of this, they don't in any way balance out the darkness. But this isn't an equinox moment when light and dark are balanced. This is winter solstice. It's a time that's overwhelmingly night, but not totally devoid of day. Such acts are like seeds planted in the soil. There are doctors and nurses, for example, who could have fled in danger of their own lives, but who stayed, knowing that odds were they will die, as so many have who have stayed. But they couldn't leave the people, the disabled, the young, the sick. And so they stayed, and they continue to stay to try to help those who are there, knowing it could be the end of their lives. And reporters who've stayed. The Syrian forces have been bombing hospitals. They've been blockading the transport of food and medicine into the people. The other day, they bombed the last children's hospital in Aleppo. I read that the last OBGYN finally decided that he had to go to save his own life, but babies are still being born. There's a Syrian man who's created a sanctuary for all of the cats that have been left behind, and some dogs and other pets too. At last count, he'd taken in over 1,000 cats. He's been opening this pet sanctuary to the children who are still there, who've lost parents and siblings, to help them cope with their trauma and the devastation and destruction all around them. One story I came across was not in Aleppo itself, but it was on a beach in Greece, where 5,000 Syrian refugees have been arriving each week for the last 3 to 5 years. As boats have made their way to shore, the people arrive, they're hungry, they're anxious, some of them are sick, many have left loved ones or lost loved ones. Usually a few have drowned along the route, and usually those are children. One woman I've been reading about is an American-born woman who immigrated to Israel. Her name is Iris Adler. She's a doctor, and she's traveled to the island of Lesbos in Greece with an organization called Israel Aid, or Israel Aid, something like that. It's a group of Israelis who go out and do like our Red Cross does. And one day she and others in her group welcomed a boatload of refugees, and there was a family with an 8-month-old baby who had died along the route. And so they helped the family to bury their baby when they arrived, their daughter. And that same day, a boat arrived, and a woman was in labor as she arrived, and they delivered the baby right there on the beach. That's the baby. On the same day, burying one baby, giving birth to another, right there on the beach, people running for their lives. Now, my favorite story that she tells was of a man who arrived in need of some medical attention, and as she cared for him, it came up that she was with this organization, Israel Aid, and he explained to her that a few years earlier he was fighting the Israelis at the Syrian border in the Golan Heights, and his leg was severely injured, and he was left all alone, and he dragged himself to a fence at the Israeli border, and he didn't know what would happen to him. But it turned out that he was greeted by members of Israel Aid, and they took him in and they repaired his leg and they nurtured him back to health and sent him back home across the border. Here he was with her when he arrived, now years later, fleeing the devastation and brutality of his own people, vulnerable and in need of help once again, and once again it was an Israeli who was helping him. He told her that he was raised from a child to hate and despise Jews as the enemy. Even in the darkest times of the year, even in the darkest moments of our lives, light can break through, and something that could be described as holy and certainly beautiful and hopeful can be born. It takes light to see one another, and when we can really see each other, that light grows. When we can offer someone a cup of tea or stop to receive the offer. When we cross the lines that divide our nations or our hearts. When we dare to respond not only to this day as having some good in it, but respond to each other as if the other has good in them as well. And we make it our job to find the good. And there's an incredible story about a heroic woman here in the United States who few people even know her name or know her story. Her name is Antoinette Tuff, and she's a teacher. And one day a gunman burst into her school with a machine gun and loads of ammunition, and he held hundreds of children hostage. She called 911, and what happened next was all recorded on the call. She started talking to the man as a person, relating to him. We all go through something in life, she said. She started to talk about her divorce and how she had a disabled child. You know, I tried to commit suicide last year after my husband left me, she told him. But look at me now. I'm still working and everything's okay. She finally talked him down, and he dropped his gun and he gave himself in. For whatever reason, instead of making this man the enemy, the other, someone to be shunned and shot. She saw part of herself in him. She related to him. She made a connection to him. Elizabeth Lesser, the co-founder of the Omega Institute, was talking about this story on the radio. That's where I heard it the other day. And she made the point that unless we learn to connect with people who we consider the other or even possibly the enemy, we'll continue to spread the darkness of misunderstanding and division and even violence. We are living right now in a deeply divided country. Fortunately, we're nowhere near as divided as Syria. But remember, even Aleppo was a thriving, pluralistic city for centuries that was known for religious toleration and education and culture. Just because a culture or a country has been tolerant in the past does not mean that it will always be that way. It's no guarantee. Attitudes and societies change. And tolerance and understanding are things that need to be constantly nurtured, protected, and cultivated. Or at least the ties that bind us together can be destroyed, even right here in our country. In places like Bosnia and elsewhere where differences were allowed to grow into deep divisions, it's going to take centuries for the people to repair the trust that once existed among them. The trust between various cultures and religions, to begin to appreciate each other again. Darkness and division grows when we cannot see one another. The question we need to be asking is, how can I shine light in this world? How can I make room in the inn of my own heart to let the holy, to let a light of something new and beautiful be born this season? Or is there no room in the inn for those who come from different places or different perspectives? Is there no room in our nation for refugees coming from Syria? And how might what is holy, what is new and beautiful and necessary, be born in the dank and smelliest and most difficult and humble circumstances? Maybe even more importantly is the question of incarnation. Incarnate literally means in flesh. How might love, or the holy, which can be just vague, ethereal, theoretical abstraction, how might love and the holy be brought to life, be made real, alive, given flesh in which to bless the world? This is a season that's immersed in the celebration that says that love and the divine can be made real, can be embodied to bless the world. It's not simply meant to be a story about something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's meant to be the story of our lives, the story of humanity, the story of how what is holy, love, justice, kindness, courage, hope, is born into the world. We're not meant to celebrate something that happened once a long time ago. It is a season when we're reminding ourselves and reminding the next generation that for love in all its glory to enter the world requires we give it flesh, our own lives. Like Mary, it is through us that the most humble of people, through us, that God, that goodness and light enter the world. And that's how the light grows in the darkness. Today is a good day. There is good in this day, and it's our job to find it. Even better, it's our job to be it and embody it. One important way to do it is to be what Lesser calls a first responder. These are the people who are willing to cross the lines that divide us, the one who is willing to take the first step towards somebody who's considered other or different, willing to try to make a connection to someone who might vote differently, believe differently, want something different for our nation. It's December 18th. Is it the 18th? It's December 18th. And the darkness seems to be growing every day. You must help bring out the light. Offering. It will go to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee that has a fund for refugees who are fleeing right now out of Syria to help them. So please give generously to these folks who have left everything and have nothing and are walking in the world not knowing what their future looks like.